Case stumbled home from the beach in a daze, bleeding from her mouth, the events of the night swirling in her mind, turning Vance into a ghost, seeing the apparition of her dead son. It was too much to process. She fumbled with her keys and staggered into the darkened house. Marian was asleep on the couch, the glow of the muted TV flickering over her worried face even in slumber. Case felt a pang of guilt for how she had treated her long-suffering roommate earlier. Marian put up with so much. In the bathroom, Case rinsed the blood and vomit from her mouth and stared at her haggard reflection. The face looking back at her was almost unrecognizable, gaunt, shadowed, eyes haunted and rimmed with dark circles. When had she become this ghost of herself? Quietly, she crept to her room and crumpled onto the unmade bed. But sleep wouldn't come. Every time she closed her eyes, the accusing glare of her son's ghost hovered in the darkness. Silent tears leaked from the corners of her eyes and dampened the pillow as waves of grief washed over her. Morning light was filtering in through the blinds when exhaustion finally pulled Case into a restless sleep plagued by nightmares. In her dreams, her little boy reached out to her, begging for help, but no matter how hard she ran, she could never reach him in time. Over and over, he slipped through her fingers and vanished. A tentative knock at the bedroom door jolted Case awake some interminable time later. She sat up, disoriented, as Marian poked her head in. "Case, honey, I made some lunch if you're hungry." The older woman's eyes were full of concern as she took in Case's rumpled, slept-in clothes and red-rimmed eyes. Case shook her head. "I'm not hungry." Her voice was hoarse. Marian hesitated, then came and sat on the edge of the bed. She placed a gentle hand on Case's arm. "You know you can talk to me, right? I'm here for you." A lump rose in Case's throat. She wanted so badly to unburden herself, but the words wouldn't come. How could she possibly explain that she was a detective who spent her off hours obsessively hunting ghosts, driven by guilt over her son's death? That she purposely picked up men she suspected of being criminals so she could use an experimental drug to turn them into ghosts as some twisted form of vigilante justice? It was insane. No one would understand. She shook her head again. "I know. I just can't. Not yet." Marian sighed but didn't push. She simply squeezed Case's arm. "Okay, well, I'll leave a plate for you in the fridge. Please eat something." With one last concerned look, she left, closing the door softly behind her. Alone again, Case flopped back on the pillows and stared at the water-stained ceiling. Her life was spiraling out of control and she didn't know how to stop it. Chasing the ghost of her son, meting out her own warped brand of justice, none of it would bring him back. Nothing could fill the ragged hole his death had ripped in her heart. And yet she couldn't seem to stop, caught in an endless cycle of grief and guilt and reckless self-destruction. Rolling over, her gaze fell on the framed photo on the nightstand. In it, she and her son grinned at the camera, cheeks pressed together, his small hand sticky in hers. It had been his last birthday. 2 weeks later, he was gone, hit by a drunk driver while riding his bike, and Case's world had shattered. Fresh tears pricked her eyes. "I'm sorry," she whispered to the photo. "I'm so sorry, baby. I should have protected you." Curling into a ball, Case let the grief overtake her, violent sobs racking her body until she had nothing left. Utterly spent, she finally dragged herself out of bed and into the shower. The scalding water beat down on her back as she sagged against the cool tile, wishing it could wash away the stains on her soul as easily as the grime on her skin. Clean and dry, Case shuffled into the kitchen. The promised plate sat in the fridge, a peace offering from Marian. Case wasn't hungry, but she dutifully unwrapped it and picked at the sandwich and carrot sticks. She had to keep up her strength, she told herself, for her next mission, because despite everything, Case knew with grim certainty that there would be a next time. Another criminal who needed to be brought to ghostly justice. Another chance to temporarily soothe the gnawing ache inside her through misbegotten vengeance. She was too far down this path to turn back now. As she methodically chewed, a plan began to take shape in her mind. She'd scour the police blotters and her contacts for likely suspects, maybe stake out a few seedy bars. She just needed one solid lead. Case jumped as her phone suddenly vibrated with an incoming text, rattling against the Formica tabletop. She snatched it up and frowned at the unfamiliar number on the screen. The text was short and cryptic. "I know what you did. We need to talk. Meet me at the old rail yard at midnight. Come alone." A chill ran down Case's spine. Who had sent this? Vance? One of his gang associates? How did they know about her extracurricular activities? Unease coiled in her gut, but Case knew she didn't have a choice. If someone had evidence of what she'd done, she needed to deal with it. Immediately and directly. Mind racing, Case pocketed the phone and started gathering her supplies. She carefully transferred a dose of the ghost-making drug to an inject pen and slipped it into her jacket along with her badge and gun. No way was she going into this meeting unarmed and unprepared. At the very least, she'd have the element of surprise on her side. The deserted rail yard was even more eerie than Case had imagined, full of rusting train cars and abandoned machinery hulking in the shadows. She arrived 15 minutes early to scope out the scene and find a good vantage point. Positioning herself behind a graffitied concrete barricade, she checked her watch and waited. Midnight arrived, then ticked by. 5 minutes, 10. Case was starting to wonder if this had been some kind of prank when the scuff of a footstep made her whirl around, dropping into a defensive crouch with her gun drawn. "Whoa there, detective. Is that any way to greet an old friend?" Case gaped in disbelief at the figure stepping out of the shadows, hands raised in supplication. "Zach? What the hell are you doing here?" Zach had been her partner years ago, before everything, before she lost her son and herself. He looked older now, face more lined and hair graying at the temples, but the crooked grin was the same. "I'm the one who texted you. We need to talk." Slowly, Case lowered her weapon. "Talk about what? What do you want, Zach? I'm not exactly the department's favorite person these days." "I know. That's why I'm here." Zach lowered his hands and stepped closer. His expression was somber. "Case, I know what you've been up to. The ghosts, the vigilante justice. You've been skirting the edges for a while now, but this is too far. You're going to get yourself killed. Or worse." Her heart hammered against her ribcage. He knew. Oh God, he knew. Panic clawed at her throat. Are you here to arrest me?" He shook his head firmly. "No. I'm here to help you, if you'll let me." He took another cautious step forward. "This isn't you, Case. The anger, the recklessness, the obsession with ghosts. You're drowning in guilt and grief. I know losing your son broke you, but this isn't the way. You need to deal with your pain, not bury it in all this." "You don't know anything about my pain," Case spat. Old, familiar rage bubbled up, temporarily burning away the panic. "You have no idea what it's like. He was my world, Zach, my heart, and he was taken from me." "I know." Zach's voice was infuriatingly gentle. "And I can't imagine how much you're hurting. But I care about you, Case. We all do. Me, Marianne, the captain. This self-destruction has to stop. Please, let us help you." He reached for her and Case jerked away. She couldn't deal with this with him. It was too much. Her control was slipping. The maelstrom of emotions she kept ruthlessly tamped down, threatening to swallow her whole. She needed to get away. "Now, I can't do this." Holstering her weapon, Case spun on her heel. "I have to go." "Case, wait." But she was already running, fleeing blindly into the night. She crashed through the rail yard, not caring about the noise she was making, just needing to put as much distance as possible between herself and Zach's too knowing gaze. His words rang in her ears, feeding the storm building inside her. It was too much, all of it. The never-ending ache of her grief, the crushing weight of her guilt, the terrifying realization that her secrets were no longer secret. She ran until her lungs burned and her legs threatened to give out, finally collapsing against the graffiti-covered side of an abandoned train car. Her chest heaved as she gulped lungfuls of cool night air. Unbidden, memories of her son, of the life she'd lost, rose up to choke her. His gap-toothed grin, sticky fingers twined with hers as they walked to the park. The way his hair gleamed white blonde in the sun, and his little voice mangled the syllables of her name into KK. The shattered emptiness inside her the moment he slipped away.
Arrased sobitori luze.
Then another, and another. The wall holding everything at bay crumbled and Case sank to the ground, pulling her knees to her chest as harsh, painful sobs racked her body. She cried for her son, for herself, for the broken mess she'd made of her life. She cried until her head pounded and her eyes burned and her throat was raw, until she was utterly hollowed out, empty. Finally, she heaved herself upright, swiping at tear-sticky cheeks with the back of one shaking hand. She felt tired, wrung out, and she knew what she had to do. What Zach said was true, she was drowning, and no amount of misplaced vengeance could keep her head above water. She needed help, real help, to deal with her grief and learn to live with it before it destroyed what little was left of her. Decision made, Case started the long walk home. It was time to stop running. Morning dawned clear and bright. Marian was in the kitchen frying eggs when Case finally stumbled in, eyes puffy and bloodshot above bruised purple shadows. The older woman took one look at her and understood. She crossed the room in an instant and pulled Case into a fierce hug. "I'm here," she murmured into Case's hair. "I'm right here." Case clung to her, fresh tears leaking free. "I know," she whispered. "I know." After a long moment, Case pulled back and swiped at her cheeks. She took a deep, steadying breath. I think I'm ready to talk now." Marian smiled, eyes shining with unshed tears of her own. "Then I'm ready to listen." Case nodded. Squaring her shoulders, she sat at the kitchen table. And for the first time since her world shattered, she started to pick up the pieces. The road ahead wouldn't be easy. Healing never was. But with the support of Marian, Zach, and others who cared for her, Case would learn to temper her grief with grace, to remember her son with joy instead of pain, and to stop chasing ghosts so that she could finally catch her breath. It was a start,